Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to come back. It seems like this is almost my second home when it comes to soil health. Just interacting with a lot of good innovators up here too. So it's hopefully today we'll be able to learn from each other. So many here probably already know sort of our geographic area. We're in southeast Pennsylvania, and we have our primary crops are corn, soybeans, and wheat. And I like to put in there as cover crops also. I'm looking at cover crops a lot differently than what I did even 5 years ago. I like to treat it as a cash crop and try and manage it as a cash crop. So you're going to hear today a bit of my passion for planting green and cover crop management. We have a large poultry operation. Consists of we market somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.75 million broiler chickens a year. We are a certified organic production facility, but recently the market that we've been with has softened in the organic market, so we're raising ABFs, but we're still maintaining the organic status, and we have to operate just like we are raising organic chickens. We also have a hog finishing unit on an adjoining farm where we market in the neighborhood of 6,400 head of fat hogs to Hatfield quality meats every year. So with all that nutrient load puts us in a CAFO environment. So if you know what CAFOs are, it's basically just a lot of regulations, nutrient management, and a stack of papers about that thick. And a lot of it I don't understand, but they say it's there for a reason, so we have to do that. We also have a wedding venue. That brown barn somewhere, we have a pointer here. That brown barn is there for a purpose. That's an old bank barn that we 5 years ago, I guess going on 6 years now, we transformed into a classic wedding venue. And so that has given me and our operation an opportunity to, in a way that I was not expecting, put it that way. We just thought this would be really cool to have a wedding venue here in the farm. But little did we know that there would be a lot of people coming in there that had no clue of what an operating farm looks like. And so they drive in, buy all those 6 poultry barns, and some get a clue of what's in there, and others just think it's a building. And so those that realize that it's poultry, they'll ask the car parkers, parking attendants, or the coordinator for the day, what do we do out there? And so we've trained our staff now to say the right words in a way that's friendly to the environment and friendly to the community and friendly to the wedding attendees. So that's an excellent opportunity to educate the public. We are in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, along with, are you using the Chesapeake? You're very close to it. And you probably send some stuff on these heavy rains, they probably make it there. But anyway, yous have your own watersheds that yous need to deal with. And Pennsylvania, the Chesapeake Bay watershed continues to get a lot of pressure, especially on agriculture, even though we feel that we are not the sole contributor. We know we're not the sole contributor, but it's easy to start pointing fingers. Lancaster County, where we're located, is I guess the hot spot. We have in Lancaster County alone have more impaired streams than any other county in the state of Pennsylvania. And so there's opportunities for funding from different programs to try and litigate the problem, but all of that costs money. It costs a lot of red tape and a lot of paperwork. And so we continue to work through that. And I will say that the Chesapeake Bay is showing improvements in the water quality. And in fact, there's opportunity for some of us to attend or take a trip to the Chesapeake Bay here in September to just see exactly what's going on there. 4 things I'm going to cover today: cover crops, and Heidi did an excellent job. That's from a research standpoint, but she covered a lot of key points I think that we need to remember when we're cover cropping and when we're planting green. I'm going to talk about my experience with interseeding, and then also cover crop and biomass management, and that's very, very important. So a number of things that we have seen, key things that I think are important that we need to remember with cover cropping. These are all benefits. Increasing water holding capacity. So in some of the research that Heidi showed, there's obviously more moisture being held in the soil by the use of green living cover than what there is if you're burning down the cover. Reduce weed pressure. That is huge. Along with that, we have found that we can reduce our herbicide. We have reduced our herbicide by 2/3 of the recommended rate of especially Acuron, Roundup. Those are the 2 key that we use in corn. We have reduced those rates by 2/3 and still have very, very good weed control. Reduces crop stress. Now, it's debatable when you have a real wet spring, a real wet summer, how much does that extra biomass on top of the soil, how much does that benefit you? But it really helps in water infiltration, if nothing else. Reduces slug pressure. Some of the research shows that in some cases there has been more slug pressure. We have not experienced that, and I'll share some information on that a little bit later. Increases organic matter. We all know that organic matter is very important in improving soil health and soil structure. Carbon sequestration. That's something that we're not talking enough about, and we're finding out more how important carbon sequestration is. There are reports just recently that were released. It was in the Washington Post that there was some, just this year, there was readings taken of carbon in our atmosphere. They are saying that our carbon levels, our parts per million, are at 415 parts per million. They said that's the highest level ever recorded. And so as those carbon dioxide levels increase, there's more of a need to reduce those carbon levels. And one of the key ways is all these acres that these farmers are planting. If we were able to keep something green, something living on that soil 365 days a year, we will see a reduction in those carbon levels. And we just had 2 Cornell tests, soil health tests, come back that were taken on our farm. Two different, one of them was in a cornfield, one of them was in a soybean field. The one cornfield recorded levels of 625 parts per million in the soil. So it's higher than what they're saying is in the atmosphere. So what we're doing is definitely making a difference. So, and then as I mentioned, we want to treat the cover crop like our cash crop. Just don't think, well, it's something green living out there, but it's more important than that. So what kind of cover crops do we choose that are going to improve the soil and soil biology? So Heidi had talked a lot about in the research with the cereal rye, but there's other cereal grains. There's wheat, rye, and canola. Some of these are mixes that we had used on our farm, and it depends on the timing of the year. Obviously, cereal rye you can plant late into the season, whereby the annual ryegrass, the oats, crimson clover, radish, and Austrian winter pea mix, you need to try and get that planted earlier in the season. That might be in September sometime, and that's difficult here, especially depending on what your program is. And less is more. So you say, well, that's an oxymoron. But anyway, you really, I think in a lot of situations, fellas are planting rates that are too high. And so that's what gets you into a situation in the spring where it's difficult to manage and difficult to plant through. Our main goal is to keep our soil covered 365 days a year. So this here picture was taken late August several years ago, where you're still seeing a significant amount of cover from planting green. And I think that was probably just cereal rye by the looks of it. But there is something that I'm really, really taking notice here the last several years with our cover crops. We're planting everything green, everything including soybeans, corn, except wheat. Wheat we plant after we take soybeans off in the fall. I am noticing that cover is not sticking around as fast as what it used to. The first couple of years when I did this, it was like, man, you could walk into the field in August and you would see something like this. You could pull it back. There was you could see earthworms, and you could see there was plenty of moisture there. But I think what is happening is that we have increased biological activity in our soil that's consuming this. We have, and I didn't include that, that would have been a good picture, but I have a picture looking down through the corn wheat field rows where you have these little middings. You know what a mitting is? It's what worms they pull to their hole, and they just it's like a little as big as my hand laying over top of their hole, and they use that to protect their home. They protect their wormhole, and so they can come up there, feed on it, or they can go pull other biomass. So it's all good stuff when you see that you have that activity going on. So I say green cover, little is better than nothing. So this is how I started out planting green. I started planting green back 15 years ago. And so this I thought was really good. And at that time, for me, I was beginning to get into this system. I was just learning. At that point of time, you didn't hear this planting in the 6-foot rye. That was just, there was just no way to manage it. But as we learned, this here is still better than nothing at all. So we did an experiment now going on 2 years ago, where we did a planting green, and we did what I like to refer to as down and brown. This here was a 5-way cover crop mix, crimson clover, radish, Austrian winter pea, oats, and annual ryegrass. And there was a lot of biomass in this field, and it's a little hard to see, but over here on the top left-hand corner, you still see a little bit of green. I should have did a side-by-side, but this here was because of an experimental plot that TMAC was doing on our farm. And at that point in time, the fellow that was planting the corn did not have the equipment to be planting into really high living cover crop. So we said, easier than just spraying 2 acres, we'll spray straight through on this field and do our own experiment. So this was all planted on the same day. Of course, this was sprayed, I'm not sure, looking back 2-3 weeks prior to planting. That was the year that Heidi was talking about, that Pennsylvania had an extensive population of slugs. This was no exception. This here field, down in brown, about where the corn planter is, you see on the picture, there was an area probably 300 foot in diameter that was just pretty much cleaned off by the slugs. And as you moved over closer to into the green living cover, we saw the first 6-8 rows. There was activity, but not what we had in down in brown. Once we got in 12, 16, 20 rows into the planting green, there was absolutely no feeding. Not to say that the slugs weren't there, but we think the slugs were feeding on the green vegetation from the cover and not realizing, hey, there's a corn plant coming up. They left that alone. So this year, and we didn't know we were going to have bad slugs that year, it was just by accident, but a lot of neighbors were replanting corn and replanting beans. In this experiment for us, that particular year, there was definitely advantage to planting into green. So as I said, planting 15 years into green, but probably now 6 years, 7 years, I want to say planting into excessive biomass, because there is a difference. Planting green into something that is 8 inches and planting into something that is 8 to 10,000 pounds of biomass is totally different. You need to manage it totally different, and you need to be prepared to handle it, because it's not something you just drop your planter in the ground and go plant. You need to make sure your equipment is equipped. So 6 years ago, we put cover crop rollers on our corn planter, and it's manufactured by Dawn Equipment. That actually was designed by a farmer in Perry County in Pennsylvania, and Dawn bought the patent from him. Working very good, and I say, when I started planting green into massive green, I was very nervous, and it happened by accident. I did not plant my cover crop the fall before planting to plant green, like Heidi was saying, you need to prepare the fall before. I planted 2 bushel of rye and thinking I was going to burn it off at 8 inches. It was one of those springs when you couldn't get into plant, and planting kept getting delayed. And of course, you know what rye does in the spring with lots of moisture. It keeps growing and growing and growing, and it came to a point where I had to make the decision, now, am I going to figure out how to plant into this, or am I going to burn it down and then have to wait for 2 or 3 more weeks for this stuff to die? You never want to plant into cover crop that is half dead. It will not work. It just is like, that is just like rubber. That cover crop is just like rubber, and you cannot cut through it. So the decision was made to, let's wait and we'll figure this out. We ended up using a brilliant color packer to roll down the cover crop. We did not have the rollers on the planter, but we did have good, we had Yetter shark tooth row cleaners on our planter. And that was the year where I said, you know, this works, and I'm never turning back. And I feel that way today. So we actually did a test in one of the fields. We got someone to do a biomass check on this field, and I was trying to stay on the low side, but actually it was higher than that, but I'm saying it was at least 8,000 pounds of biomass. And that looks like, what do you want with all that on the soil? It really, really paid off. That field averaged 235 bushel of corn that year, so I'm not disappointed, and don't feel like I left any bushels on the table because of managing cover crop like that. So there's probably three ways that you can actually utilize cover crop. You don't need to be rolling it and planting it. It might be grazing cattle. And I know there's grazing that's done up here in New York and certain parts of the US where this system makes a lot of sense for farmers. You are recycling a lot of nutrients by grazing cattle. So you have the cover crop that's working for you. You have the cattle that's on there, and obviously when the cattle eat, it has to come out the other end. So that's going back into the soil. And so the system keeps going like this. You're feeding all the microbes, the nutrients in the soil, the soil biology. It's really, really a good practice if that works into your program. Then the one on your far right, you can make forage off of this. If there's certain species that you use, that works also very well. And of course, then the one on the bottom is the one that I'm more familiar with that there was planting into standing rye. I think Heidi mentioned a little bit about the nitrogen consideration that you need to give when you're planting into living cover crop. This may be a little bit hard to see with the light here, but you'll see right here there's 12 rows that did not have nitrogen at planting time. That was intentional. We understood that, you know, with planting into a lot of biomass, a lot of cover, green living cover like that, there is still a lot of nitrogen that's being tied up in that cover crop that's not being released. And it's important to get some nitrogen to that plant as soon as possible. So right here is where we just turned the nitrogen off and did 12 rows, and it showed all season long. It was like 25 bushel less at harvest season. Even though we put the same amount of nitrogen on, that is what we did where we put the nitrogen on early. So important to get the nitrogen on there earlier at planting time. So we continue to bump up that rate of nitrogen at planting time, but our total nitrogen is like 115 pounds for a 200 bushel target of corn. So we are seeing that we can reduce nitrogen with the use of certain cover crops. And I'll probably cover more of that, some of our cover crop mixes in the farmer panel. So providing armor for the soil is what we want to do. That there was just taken last spring, I think, in a rye field. You can see the corn coming up, and it certainly doesn't look like it's starving for anything. Temperature, Heidi covered that a little bit. What we're seeing here is that the higher amount of residue. The purple line on the bottom, which was a rye residue, which had the highest biomass, kept the soil cooler during the summertime. Well, even all season long, clear up until August 14th, you see that the soil is cooler, and you take a lot of stress off the crop if it can stay cooler. And then you'll see the top line up there. On top is no residue at all, bare soil. So you can see, there's definitely a temperature difference there of 8 degrees, something like that. Well, even more than that at some point. So that can be significant for crop development. So 5 things to remember if you're planting green. Start simple. Do not start with your whole farm. I would not encourage that in no way at all. Select the right equipment. Make sure your equipment is designed to handle a lot of that green biomass. Select the right corn hybrids. Some corn hybrids will like that environment better than others. And as I mentioned, the nitrogen penalty due to the high carbon, and select the right rate and the right herbicide. You don't have to use rollers on your corn planter. I mean, there's a company actually in Lancaster County that manufactures these rollers. They've become very popular. It's called the I&J roller. You can either roll the crop before you plant or roll the crop after. Some have decided that rolling the cover crop after they plant has worked better than rolling it before they plant. So that's something you might want to experiment with. And then they make a front-mounted roller that you can put on your planter tractor that you do everything in one pass. Cover crop interseeding is not new. We are still trying to learn a lot about interseeding, but I will say that you guys up in New York have us beat by a long shot. It works really well up here. In many, many years, we are still struggling in southeast Pennsylvania, and we still don't know for sure why. We've experimented, and again this year, I'll touch on that then, but this interseeder, actually this very one is in New York State now. We built this unit, and we are actually selling interseeders 12 rows and 6 rows commercially, and that particular 12 row ended up here in New York. We have been doing some experimenting with 30 and 60 inch corn. This is our second year now that we're doing it. We are trying to figure out if there's any correlation with shading. Is this why our corn, we like to grow 12-foot corn, and we like to grow it with big leaves, capture a lot of photosynthesis, but when it comes to trying to establish a cover crop, interseeded cover crop, it's not been in our favor. So this here is a picture of this year's crop. This here has annual ryegrass, crimson clover, berseem clover, and I think there's supposed to be some radish in there somewhere. I think there is, but just not seeing it. So this here is 60-inch corn, and what we're seeing is the 60-inch corn, we are getting better cover crop establishment than what we are in the 30-inch corn, like you see there. That there's at the end of the field. But if you walk back into the field, the crop really, really gets short. And so it's obvious that we have a shading it's restricting the growth because of the shading. We had a real good establishment, but it does not want to keep growing. We also did a herbicide plot here on our farm this year, and obviously there where we had a residual versus no residual, there's definitely more growth where we didn't use any kind of residual or herbicide. So our early interseeding observations are incorporation is the best way to do it. If you have the equipment to do it, incorporation is the best. Seeding rate of radish should be less than 2 pounds. So what we're finding in the years we've been experimenting with it is that radish really tends to blossom out. And so you really need to be careful on your planting rates on radish. Early V5 is better than later. Even V4 is really good timing. You want to get that up before the corn shades. Shade tolerant species is a key factor. And we did experimenting with that where more upright leaves versus leaves that really lay out do definitely there is an advantage to the upright leaf. The interseeded crop does not negatively affect the cash crop. I think that is one thing that there's been a lot of questions raised. Well, if you're going to be interseeding into that corn, aren't you taking nutrients, robbing nutrients and moisture from the cash crop that you're raising? We have not noticed that in any situation. In fact, there is some, I think, research to back up that if you're raising a legume in your interseeded crop, that actually is feeding the corn plant. Challenges related to interseeding, you need to plan ahead. Number one, your herbicide program is very important to consider in the spring. So just don't go out there and throw a full-blown program and expect amazing results. Herbicides, it's a very small planting window. We know what happens corn in June. It just grows fast, and so you gotta be prepared. Find the most effective seed mix. Select a seed that enhances soil biology and soil health. And then, of course, you need sunshine and moisture, something that obviously is very important. So there are some that have had success with late seeding cover crops, going through the corn in August and blowing it down between the corn rows. That can work if you have the right weather conditions. But you're dependent on that stuff to germinate right on top of the ground. Then there's aircraft. I don't believe you're doing a lot of that up here, or if you did, you're not doing it anymore. When you get out into the Midwestern states, this is a lot more common in establishing cover crops. And then we have some guys that say, well, let's just put a Valmor box in the front of our front end loader, run a tube back along with a deflector and just blow it on top of the late planted soybeans. In that particular year, this worked for this fella. This here picture actually was taken here in New York State. Help me out. Whose farm was it? Yeah, Aurora Ridge, if you know where they're at. That there was planted. The one on the right was actually interseeded in, I think that was early July, and they took corn silage off and then decided to plant, was it annual ryegrass, I believe, on the left, after they took corn silage off. So you can see the advantage that you have on interseeding here in New York. In fact, they had, I was up the one day when this cover crop was growing, I think, pretty near like that, where they were spreading drag lining liquid dairy manure at close to 10,000 gallon or so to the acre. And within 15, 20 minutes, you could walk across that. It had all percolated down through the soil. So it's there for more than just surface protection. So do you want to protect your soil from drying out and heat stress? Do you want to add carbon and organic matter to your soil? Are you trying to create a grazing crop for late fall? Those are all questions you need to ask if it's right for you. Key things to remember when you're interseeding: start with small acres. Use a grass and legume in your mix. Use as many shade-tolerant species as possible. Plan a herbicide selection accordingly. Performance can vary from year to year, and we know that if you're in crop production, we don't know what the normal is anymore, because what's normal might be what you're living in now, and next year will be different. So probably the most often way of establishing cover crops is with a drill. And that often comes with challenges because we can't get our crop harvested in time, or weather conditions don't allow us to plant a cover crop. But I would say don't ever give up on planting a cover crop. Yous were wet last fall, Pennsylvania was wet last fall. There was a lot of cover crop that didn't get planted in Pennsylvania, and that's pretty unusual for us. But there were a number of guys that planted cover crop in late December. And some of that was out of, you know what, I never tried this, but we're gonna do it. It was frosted enough that they could get over the field without mudding it in, but yet they were able to get it drilled in. There's one fella not so far from me. He's an aggressive farmer. He actually just put rollers on his planter this spring, and he also planted cover crop December 23rd last winter. He will tell you that that was his best cover crop that he planted this spring. He had May the 18th, I think he said, he had rye that was shoulder high, and he just had a ball planting because he had the rollers. And he said, from here on, I will not shy away at all from planting some sort of cover late into the season like that. So, and oats is another good spring cover if you're looking for cover. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't talk about manure management. I was told this morning you can put on as much manure as you want to up here as long as you're not a CAFO. Well, that doesn't happen in Pennsylvania. We do have regulations on manure application. And so one of the things that is starting to gain a little bit more momentum is manure injection. I've tried it twice, and for me, I feel it hasn't been successful. And the reason I say it's not successful might not be that for somebody else, but when you're planting green and you want as much biomass as you can possibly capture in the spring, incorporating in the spring really destroys your cover crop. And for me, I would sooner, I guess, just surface apply my manure, my liquid hog manure in this case. You can do it with dairy manure too. I would sooner surface apply it, lose some nitrogen, than go in and destroy it like there. This here had 7,000 gallons of hog manure, and that cover crop never recovered. You could see when the day came to plant, you could still see some ridges, and you could still see that there was cover crop rows missing. So now I'm told that, I don't know the name of it, there's a new manure injector out that I need to pay attention to because it's supposed to be a lot less aggressive, but still do the job. So I will continue to monitor that, but for me, I would sooner keep my cover. This here was some research from University of Minnesota, I think it was, just recently that was released about taking nitrate readings 24 inches deep into the soil. So we have, in this test here, they had 19 different sites that they planted a cover crop in the fall, did replicated plots of no cover and cover. And the next spring, when they took the nitrate readings, you can see that there was less nitrates 24 inches down in the cover than what there was no cover. So on the average, there was 124 pounds of nitrate nitrogen where there was a living, growing cover, and where there was no cover, there was 202 pounds. So how much of that is getting into you're losing? Maybe getting into some underground streams? We don't know, but obviously we are being able to capture more of that nitrate nitrogen by the use of cover crops. This here, similar to what's outside here, that you can see a rainfall simulator. This here was actually the one on the right is comes off of our farm. NRCS did a field day technician training just this past spring, and they pulled that sample of soil, and then the one on the left is a neighbor. That's an organic farmer with a lot of tillage. And you can see, hope you can see there, it's pretty light in here, but there is hardly any water at all in that pan there that came off of the long-term no-till, and practically all of the organic soil ended up in here. But there are universities, or Rodale specifically, that are working on research, and I'm not opposed to organic production. What I am opposed to is the plow or working. So if we can figure out a way that we can use no-till and we can use cover crops in organic production, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. There's a little better picture there. You can see that there's just a significant amount of water runoff and actually even sediment in that demonstration there. So this is what we want to prevent. We do not want tons of soil and nutrients going down the stream. And this here is a picture from Lancaster County that came off of an organic farm. That's what gets us in trouble. So 4 things. Number 1, no-till increases soil aggregation, increases water infiltration. Carbon sequestration, I talked about that. I think we need to pay a lot more attention to that. Soil fertility, enhanced by cover crop rotation, and animal manure. We want to build biological activity. It restores the soil's energy system, is stimulated by multi-species cover crops, and encourages beneficial insects. And a well-managed grazing system. I think I like to refer to it as the Cadillac of soil health. It increases soil fertility and captures energy from the sun. Many of you probably have seen this, and I'm not going to spend time on that now, but there's a lot of key elements that you need to use in order to really reach the hub of soil health. Yeah, you can use continuous no-till, but it's going to use cover crops. It's going to use cover crop management. It's going to be managing manure. If you got that, planting green. You want to enhance soil armor. There's just a whole lot of things in that wheel. And if you think about it, a wheel would not stay together if it didn't have all those spokes in it. If you take a couple of those things out of the wheel, some of those spokes out of the wheel, just like say, well, why do I have to manage carbon? Or why do I have to have living roots? Why do I have to use cover crops? If you start taking some of them out, that whole system can collapse really fast. So just, that's in an NRCS publication. That's, some of them might be around here today. Just take a look at that and study it sometime. So two most important things I think that we need to remember in this whole system of managing our soils. If we don't have good water and if we don't have healthy soils, we can't raise a crop. And there's some of those things that we don't control. Number one, we don't control the rain, and we don't control the sunshine, but we can control some of the things on how we manage our soils. Just to want to touch a little bit, we have an organization that I'm proud to be president of, the Pennsylvania No-Till Alliance. We've been together now for 15 years, and we have a very active board. They are all involved in farming of some sort or another, and they all have a passion for soil health. And they feel like we have done a significant support to those farmers in Pennsylvania over the years. And we just recently completed a soil health, well, it wasn't a soil health, but it was more no-till and cover crop survey. And we feel like with the Alliance's organization and the education and support that we have given to the farmers, we're better than what we were. So probably three key funders that the Alliance are supported by is the Stroud Water Research. They're located in southeast Pennsylvania. If you ever get a chance to get to southeast Pennsylvania, please take time to visit their facility. They've got, they focus obviously mostly on water, but in the last 5 years we have worked with the Alliance, and Stroud has worked closely together because it's, just as I said, the water in the soil is very important, and so their focus and their research is on the water, and our focus is on managing the soil. So felt like we've been working together very well, and been excited about that. NIFWIF, National Fish and Wildlife, and then Growing Greener. We just completed well, actually 2 summer field days. One was held at our farm several weeks ago with a large attendance, and then we also had, this was in eastern southeast Pennsylvania, then we had one on western PA the following week. We did a planting green demonstration there that we're planting in the sorghum Sudan. And then that little plot out there was interesting. That there had 64 different variety interaction. It was actually 8 different mixes, but we crossed them in order to make 64, so that you got to see what different species, how they interacted with other species. It's still there today. Now the sunflowers are blooming. That looks really cool in there. So some of the activities, we provide speakers to conservation districts throughout the state at no charge due to some of the grants that we have. Participate in Penn State Ag Progress Days, which is next week. Partnering with Stroud If you want to look at an interesting video sometime, it's called Lay of the Land. It's available on YouTube. We helped put that together in cooperation with Stroud, just talking about the whole elements, a lot of what I talked about today. We do farmer-to-farmer mentoring. We have town hall meetings, and the board members don't always just serve on the no-till board. They're involved in conservation boards, local ag advisory boards, and more. We came up with this sign several years ago that we have been getting out across the state, where we feel that it's important for the public to know why we are growing cover crops. Everyone can understand cleaner water, and then it can understand healthier soils. And so that is our purpose and our message that we want to get out. So that's all I have. I guess, is there time for questions?
Yeah, there's time for one or two questions. Give Jim Hershey a round of applause.
I'll be around. I'll be in the farmer panel, but if you have any questions specific to what I presented here, take them.
I have one simple question. The people who are planting in November and December, are they increasing the seeding rates at all, or just,
Good question, Paul. Typically not. Typically, we would still recommend 40, 50 pounds of cereal rye. Yeah.
And to probably clarify, most of those folks are planting green, so they're allowing it to stay longer?
Yes. So yes, it's important if you know you're going to be planting green, and especially a lot of planting green, it's more important to keep that seeding rate down. If you're planning to burn it off at 8 inches or something like that, that's risky, because you never know if you're going to be able to get in and kill it, but you could get away with a bit higher seeding rate in that environment.
So I was thinking that if you're planting in December, and if you're not planting green, giving it time to grow, then you probably want to be planting green if you're planting it in December.
Yeah. Yes.
When you talk about reduced herbicide rate, is that zero herbicide, or is that a lower rate?
It's a lower rate of a residual herbicide. So, for instance, Acuron's recommended rate, I think, is 3 1/4 quarts, and we're using 1 1/4 quarts.
Aren't you afraid of getting resistance, weed resistance to herbicide?
We are not. We have not experienced any kind of weed pressure at all, being that we have all that biomass on and pretty much keeps the soil covered until the corn gets up and gets the ground shaded. We haven't. Yes.
Have you ever interseeded into wheat, seen with a paving sprayer, and they interseeded clover into wheat, a couple weeks before harvest?
Mm.
This seemed to work really well in terms of getting the wheat that got on.
I have not. There is a fellow on our no-till board, Lucas Criswell, that has been doing some interseeding, but he's actually been interseeding soybeans into his wheat. So he's planting 30-inch wheat in the fall, and then coming in the spring and planting in between there with soybeans. But I think there could be an opportunity to plant a clover or something like that, a legume. Mm-hmm. All right, thank you.
Yeah.